Brothers and sisters, the Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus told his disciples this parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out at dawn to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with them for the usual daily wage, he sent them into his vineyard. Going out about 9 o'clock, the landowner saw others standing idle in the marketplace, and he said to them, "You too go into my vineyard, and I will give you what is just." So they went off, and he went out again around noon, and around 3 o'clock, and did likewise. Going out about 5 o'clock, the landowner found others standing around and said to them, "Why do you stand here idle all day?" They answered, "Because no one has hired us." He said to them, "You too go into my vineyard." When it was evening, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Summon the laborers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and ending with the first." When those who had started about 5 o'clock came, each received the usual daily wage. So when the first came, they thought that they would receive more, but each of them also got the usual wage. And on receiving it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, "These last ones worked only an hour, and you have made them equal to us, who bore the day's burden and the heat." He said to one of them in reply, "My friend, I am not cheating you. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Take what is yours and go. What if I wish to give this last one the same as you? Or am I not free to do as I wish with my own money? Are you envious because I am generous? Thus the last will be first, and the first will be last." The Gospel of the Lord.
Well, this Sunday is one of those Sundays that we have a great selection of readings that literally every reading is filled with tremendous detail. We could really be here till tomorrow morning and not even scratch the surface. So lucky for you, there's 11 o'clock Mass. And normally I like to tie all of the readings together, but today there's one sentence that we're going to focus on, only one sentence, and it comes from the second reading, and we're going to get to that in just a moment. And that one sentence really, when properly interpreted, when you look really at the original Greek, focuses on one word. It's a word that's kind of popular today and has been popular for some time, and that word is the word citizenship. Citizenship. I went on to Merriam-Webster online, and if it's online, it must be correct, huh? It's the line. Merriam-Webster online said that the word citizenship is in the top 20% of popular words in the United States today. Now, where they get that statistic, I have absolutely no idea. But it's online, it must be true. And it is a popular word. And citizenship, meaning of citizenship, that's been a topic a lot lately, and it's really a reality. It's probably been with our country from before we ever began, and if we really study history, the meaning of citizenship probably goes back to the beginning of recorded time as we reflect on the importance of citizenship. And what does that word really mean? What does citizenship really mean? So to go back to the dictionary, dictionary gives the following definitions. Number one, the state of being vested with the rights, privileges, and duties of a citizen. I never thought you could really use the actual root word in the definition. Sister didn't allow us to do that in school, you know. But nonetheless, that's the first definition. The state of being vested with the rights, privileges, and duties of a citizen. Number two, the character of an individual viewed as a member of a society. The character of an individual viewed as member of society. Number 3, behavior in terms of the duties, obligations, and functions of a citizen. So behavior in terms of the duties, obligations, and function of a citizen. And a broadest definition, the member of a community, and it was opened up, gave examples like a school community. So members of a larger community, they broadened the definition of citizenship. Well, why do I bring that up today? The second reading, the very last sentence, is a very key sentence. It says, "Only conduct yourselves in a way worthy of the gospel of Christ." Notice some of the definitions of citizenship mention character and behavior. Only conduct yourselves in a way worthy of the gospel of Christ. Very important sentence to put into our minds and hearts. And if we really look at the original translation, if you go back to the Greek, it really is saying, live like good citizens. It's the more precise definition in the original text. It is translated here, only conduct yourselves in a way worthy of the gospel of Christ, but really the most precise translation would be, live like a good citizen. And why is St. Paul saying this to the Philippians? He's calling them to citizenship. Well, to live in Philippi in Paul's time, you were not doing too bad. Philippi was not a bad address. It was a pretty good place to live. And the people of Philippi were all citizens of Rome. They were Roman citizens. And if you really study history of the time, the people of Philippi were particularly proud of being Roman citizens. They were very proud because they were very important commercially. If you were going from Asia Minor to Greece, the only way to get there was right through Philippi. And so they became a very important place commercially, and they were proud of their Roman citizenship. We even hear about this in the Acts of the Apostles. In the 16th chapter, talks about the Philippians being proud of their Roman citizenship. And the actual number of Jewish people who lived in Philippi in the time were very few, very small Jewish community. They were so few in number they didn't even have a synagogue. That's how small the Jewish people were. Well, that's an important detail. Why? Because the church of Philippi, which was the first church Paul founded, was mostly made up of Gentiles, not Jews. And they were Gentiles who were proud to be Roman citizens. And Paul is tapping into this and saying to them, well, as proud as you are to be a Roman citizen, you need to be even more proud to be a citizen of the kingdom of heaven. And that's basically what Paul is trying to say in that one line. As proud as you are of your Roman citizenship, be even more proud that you are a citizen of the kingdom of heaven. And Paul goes on through all of his writings, especially in Philippians, to talk about what it means to be a worthy citizen of heaven. He says, first of all, remember you're always a citizen of heaven. First of all, he says that. Secondly, if you accept that you're a citizen of heaven, then you have to accept that Christ must reign within your heart. More important than the emperor of Rome, Christ must reign within your heart. And third, he said, if you're really a citizen of heaven, then you've got to follow Christ's law. Just as it's important to follow Roman law, you got to follow Christ's law. And fourthly, he said you got to be loyal to Christ. Just as you're loyal to Rome, you got to be loyal to Christ. And he goes on to them and tells them you need to live by the grace of the gospel. Just as we live by the grace of being an important city, we got to live by really the grace of the gospel. He's using their physical condition of life to try to teach them how to live in that citizenship of heaven. Human citizenship is important. heavenly citizenship is even more important. Both, I believe, human citizenship, for us, the United States, we need to acknowledge God. We still do that in our nation. And religiously, we acknowledge God. And we need to see that these two things are not opposed to one another. Very often today we try to make that citizenship of our human residents opposed to the citizenship of the heavenly residents. But we really need to see that they're not opposed, but really that all things are brought to perfection in God. Why? God is the one who created us. God is the one who gave us our intellect. God calls us to intimacy with Him, and God is the one who gives us hope in that heavenly citizenship. So Paul calls the citizens of heaven to show their godly presence. That's what he's calling the people of Philippi to do, especially in that line. And he's really calling them to unity, not to be divided, but to be unified. And we see this especially throughout all of the Scripture, a hallmark moment in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 11, verse 17, a kingdom divided in itself will not stand. Call of unity. And Paul is really calling in this particular one line of that whole passage to a unity in God. To live as citizens of Rome, yes, but to live as citizens of the kingdom of heaven in a unified way. Well, for us, our U.S. citizenship, especially lately, we have points of disunity, and we also have points of unity. In our citizenship here in the U.S., we've got, points that we're sharply divided on. Watch the news, you'll see it. But we also have moments of great unity. Probably the most unifying moment right now, at least in my opinion, is the way the country has once again come together for all those in Texas and Florida, now Puerto Rico, all of those citizens of the U.S. who are in great turmoil and stress because of natural disaster. And say what you want, no matter what divisions we have, when some disaster occurs, the people of the United States rally together beautifully. And there have been so many beautiful stories. Today we'll take that second collection for the victims of the hurricanes, as is going on throughout all of the churches of the U.S. But if you watch the news, we've heard of different stars having concerts to benefit those who have lost everything. We've seen our children who, again, today have just sung so beautifully, but we saw people their age running lemonade stands on the news to raise money to give to victims of hurricanes. We've seen of all kinds of drop-off centers across the country to drop off needed supplies to be shipped to those in Texas and in Florida and Puerto Rico and now far beyond. Real point of unity of our nation has been focusing on some great need, especially when we see human life in problem. The lives who have been lost, the lives who really have been destroyed, all of what people have worked for gone. We really rally together at those moments in our human citizenship. Well, church citizenship, I suppose, is the same. We've got points that divide us, in the church. There are many issues we discuss with differences of opinion, but there is also moments of unity, moments of great unity. And if we take those 5 little points from St. Paul today, we have to question ourselves. Do you really believe, first and foremost, do you really believe that you're a citizen of heaven? Do you believe that? Do you believe that you really belong to the kingdom of heaven and direct and orientate your life in that way? Very important question. And secondly, do you really believe that Christ is the king of your life? Do you really believe that? And live your life in that fashion? And if so, do you really obey all of Christ's laws? And particularly those that you may struggle with and say, well, I disagree with that. Are you in humility willing to say, well, I'll still live by that law because Christ is king and I am a citizen of heaven? Am I really willing to live by that law even if some other element of my mind or heart says something different? Am I willing to live by that law, obey that law? And number 4, really to be loyal to Christ in that fashion. Am I willing to say my loyalty to Christ really supersedes everything else? And do we see the grace of the gospel? Could you begin to imagine where the world would be if we all lived by the teaching of the gospel, the graces that would flow? It's amazing the number of people who have told me in the last couple of weeks, between the floods, the hurricanes, and the earthquakes, I think God is ticked off. I don't know if you've heard people say that, but so many have said that to me. And I said, well, I don't think God is sending this, but if you think that God's ticked off, maybe you better think about why and bring about some change. You know, there probably are many things the Lord is not pleased about. Why do I bring all this up? Next Sunday is Life Chain. And Life Chain is the opportunity for us to live as citizens of the kingdom of heaven. And Life Chain is that moment for us to live within our citizenship here in the United States as citizens of the kingdom of heaven. And Life Chain is that moment once a year that we are invited for 1 hour to stand on Niagara Falls Boulevard, to stand in silence, not confrontation, to stand in silence for the dignity and value of human life. From 2 o'clock in the afternoon to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, for that 1 hour, we stand saying that as citizens of the kingdom of heaven, we believe our citizenship here in the United States, we need to grow in a respect for human life from the moment of conception to the moment of natural death. Could you begin to imagine the impact that St. Gregory the Great parish would have if we were all there? Our section is in front of the Boulevard Mall, from the corner of Maple Road and the Boulevard heading in front of the mall, that whole space in front of the mall. When I first arrived in 2014, I was told by the Respect Life Committee of the parish, well, expect maybe about 6 or 8 people to be with you. That's all that ever comes from St. Greg's. So, well, that's unacceptable. And last year I was very pleased, really, truly. We had about 300, which was really tremendous. But that's still not quite 1.5% of our parish. It's really a very small number. Could you begin to imagine the impact that we would have as people drove by if they saw all of us there as citizens of the kingdom of heaven, saying our citizenship here on earth requires us to believe in human life? You know, all of us have watched for weeks now the destruction of human life, people who have died, people whose lives are destroyed because of the hurricanes. And that loss of human life, especially those who have died, is tragic, no doubt. And we've seen in Mexico, now they had yet another earthquake yesterday, the many who've died in Mexico. And we see images of them pulling children out of the rubble of school buildings. And if you are like I am, I start to cry sitting watching the news as we see the destruction of human life from these natural disasters. And now we see the footage of Puerto Rico and the horrific effect that the hurricane has had, and the people who have died with local ties here in Western New York, and it's tragic. Do you realize that there are 60 million, more than 60 million citizens of the kingdom of heaven who have never had the privilege to be born in this country? You know, from that moment we're conceived in the womb, we are eternal. From that moment we are conceived in the womb, we are uniquely created in God's eyes. And over the course of abortion being legalized, over 60 million citizens of the kingdom of heaven, citizens of the United States, were never allowed to be born. And I find it very unusual watching the news, because at times when we will see a tragic story of someone who has murdered a woman who is pregnant, and they apprehend the person and charge them, they're charged often with 2 counts of murder: the woman who is pregnant, who died, and the unborn child. The laws of this country, many of the states, will charge that individual with the murder of the unborn child. But yet at the same time, at the same moment, if that woman chose to go to have an abortion, there would have been no call of murder. The law is completely inconsistent. These are citizens of the kingdom of heaven. From that moment of conception, our own fellow Americans who were never allowed to be born. Do we care about them? This week we're called to really question, what does it mean to be a good citizen? And next week I invite you to leave with me at 1:30 while the bus is here, to leave with me and to go and stand for 1 hour as citizens of the kingdom of heaven and citizens of this great nation, to look after, defend, and help those citizens unable to speak for themselves.